Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Korman Productions. This week we're talking about Quantum Leap, Season 1, Episode 6, The Color of Truth. This episode was directed by Michael V'ger, who I'm pretty familiar with, actually. He did Babylon 5, some episodes of that, as well as some Star Trek episodes. Some very good Star Trek episodes, I might add, including a DS9 episode that was very memorable. The episode's description reads as follows. As the black chauffeur of an elderly Southern woman, Sam must overcome prejudice to prevent the death of a black woman. Okay, so right off the bat, I'm taking issue with the episode's description from Internet Movie Database, since technically that's not what this episode is about. The death that Sam is there to prevent is that of Miss Melanie, the woman that Sam is driving around. The black woman who almost dies is somewhat of a direct result of Sam being there in the first place, and we will get into that. But the episode's description from Internet Movie Database is inaccurate in this case. The episode takes place on August the 8th, 1955, and originally aired May 3rd, 1989. Before going any further, I will tell you two things. One, this is not a spoiler-free video, so if you haven't yet watched this 30-year-old episode, please go and check it out and then come back and watch my video on the episode. Secondly, if you like this video and want to support the channel, please hit me up with a like, share, comment, and please subscribe to my channel. The interesting thing about this episode is that I almost feel like it could have aired anywhere during the series run, and it wouldn't be out of place, unlike the first 4 or 5 episodes of Season 1, which have a very different feel for much of the rest of the series. In a lot of ways, this episode feels like the show finding its footing. This is the first, but not exactly last, social commentary episode of the series, tackling serious issues as it was known to do. I can't claim to really know what the television landscape was like back in 1989. I don't know if these type of topics were being discussed back then on television. I do know that Star Trek Next Generation was airing at this time. It was around its 3rd season, and that was a show known for tackling social topics, such as this series does. If this show were to air today, there would be many who would be accusing it of the social justice warriors overtaking the series, and I would question what in the world they were talking about, because Quantum Leap has pretty much always done episodes like this. On its face, the show seems to be having just a simple racism is bad message, but I would argue that it's actually a little bit more than that. Quantum Leap is in a unique position to have Sam Beckett be put in other people's shoes and to showcase what living in those shoes might be like. In this case, the shoes are the shoes of a black man living in the Jim Crow South in 1955 and what that was like. Now, one more point that I wish to make before moving on into the episode itself and doing the scene-by-scene analysis, as I usually do. I was all set to compare this episode to Driving Miss Daisy. I was going to say that this episode takes clear inspiration from that movie. It's a movie that starred Morgan Freeman and Jessica Tandy, about a black man hired to drive around an older white woman and who form a 20-year friendship as a result. Jessica Tandy in the movie even has a dead husband, as Miss Melanie does in this episode. I even went as far as to watch the movie in preparation for doing this video to see if it covered similar ground, and it really doesn't. I mean, there's definitely a covering racism angle. There's a subtext that's definitely there, but it's not dwelled upon all that much. The movie really is about the friendship between Morgan Freeman's character and Jessica Tandy, and less about racism, even though occasionally in subtle ways it is brought up. However, there is one big hole in my theory that this episode took inspiration from that movie, in the fact that the movie went into theaters in December of 1989. And this episode aired in May 1989, well before that movie came out. So any similarities seem to be a giant coincidence. So if you thought like me and thought that this episode was actually a homage to that movie, you, like myself, are actually wrong. So getting into the episode itself, Sam leaps in. He's in a diner. He has no idea where, when, or who he is. But he knows that he's hungry. So he takes a seat at the diner. And he notices that everybody is getting angry, and he doesn't know why, until he sees his image in the mirror. In the background of the scene, and he doesn't get a single line at this point in the episode, we see the sheriff, played by Royce D. Applegate, a very reliable character actor that I am very familiar with. He was in 23 episodes of Sequest DSV, which amounts to the first season of that show, as well as appearing in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, the series Jag, which is another Donald Bazzario series, by the way. I'm not sure if I've ever mentioned that. The Rookie, and Seabiscuit, all movies that I have seen him in. He actually appears twice in this series. He shows up again in a 4th season episode titled Play Ball as a totally different character. He sadly passed away in 2003. Also appearing twice in this series is Howard Johnson, the one who plays Jesse Tyler, who we only see in images in the mirror. And he actually has the honor of reprising his role in a 3rd season episode, actually the finale of season 3. He's one of the few actors to do so. He didn't have much of a career. He only had 5 appearances on the Internet Movie Database. The last one in 1993 in a movie called The Vanishing. So, right off the bat, it seems to me that Sam Beckett has changed history, because I doubt the original Jesse sat at that counter, creating this stir and setting off much of what happens in this episode. Right off the bat, the timeline has massively changed, which will become important later on, and when we get into that discussion. The sheriff's 2 sons approach Sam, ready to give him a beatdown, and mind you, Jesse is an elderly man, so no points for class here. The waitress steps in and suggests to Jesse that he take Miss Melanie's lunch to her to avoid getting into any further trouble. Sam exits Patty's Cafe, ends up wandering around a little bit, admires himself in his reflection before he sees one of the boys staring back at him with an angry glare, which convinces Sam that he needs to move on. Eventually, he hears Miss Melanie call for him, demanding that he get over there right that instant. Miss Melanie is played by Susan French, who is absolutely dynamite in this episode. It's a really great performance, and as we go along, I'll point out the reasons why. She has appearances in movies Jaws 2, Flatliners, which actually amused me when I noticed that particular credit, television shows such as Remington Steele, Dallas, Little House on the Prairie, Star Trek The Next Generation, and Picket Fences. She died on April 6, 2003 at the age of 91, and given the fact that she was already pretty old when this episode aired, I would be very surprised if she had still been with us. Actually, given the fact that she was born in 1912, that would make her about 110 if she were still alive today, which would be pretty close to the oldest person alive. Miss Melanie is actually a pretty interesting character, in that she's not an actively hateful person, but she definitely is a product of her time. Miss Melanie starts to yell at him about various offenses, about this and that, most of which Sam is not responsible for. That would be the person he leaped into, Tyler. Rather, Jesse Tyler. Miss Melanie wants to go visit her husband at the cemetery, but Sam doesn't remember how to get there, and he makes all sorts of excuses for why he doesn't remember, none of which Miss Melanie buys. But eventually, she directs him there. We get to the cemetery, and Miss Melanie is upset because they have not been keeping up on taking care of her gravestone. And this scene is actually important for humanizing Miss Melanie, because up until this point, she's been nothing but a pain in Sam's butt. Criticizing him for this, for that, for everything, really. She goes and tries to clear the weeds, but eventually, Sam gets involved and tells her to let him do it, empathetically. This scene is also good for establishing the bond between these two characters. Eventually, Miss Melanie sits by her late husband's gravestone as Sam wanders off and encounters Al at the 9-minute and 54-second mark. When Sam sees Al, he's all excited because he's leaped into a black man, and he's saying that if he can leap into a black man, the scientific possibilities are endless. Okay, I found Sam's enthusiasm about this a little goofy. My preferred interpretation of the series is that Sam's mind was leaping, not his body. And I think the books written by Ashley McConnell on this series kind of take that theory as well. Unfortunately, the series kind of craps all over that as the series progresses and suggests that Sam's body is leaping, not just his mind. The body of the person Sam is leaping into is being replaced, bounced into the future while Sam replaces him. So why should replacing a black man be any different than replacing anybody else? A black person is not some kind of subhuman or different class of human. He's just a human. When he leaps into a chimp, it makes sense that Sam would be impressed and act like this. When he leaps into a child, and oh boy, there's a discussion there that I could have, but I don't think I need to go into that rabbit hole right now. I think I'll save that for when we get there. The discussion will give you a headache if you think about it overly much. Anyway, Al does not share Sam's enthusiasm. He doesn't think it's fascinating. He thinks it's dangerous, because being a black man in the South during this time was dangerous. Sam asks Al, what does Ziggy say he's there to do? And for the first time in the series, Ziggy has a clear-cut reason for Sam's presence there, and it's to save Miss Melanie from getting hit by a train. And once again, I will point out that history has already changed, because Sam sat at that lunch counter when the original Jesse, no doubt, didn't do that. And this timeline will continue to change from Sam's actions. Ziggy projects that there's an 86% chance that Sam is there to prevent Miss Melanie from getting squished by a choo-choo. These are Al's words, not mine. Sam asks about Jesse. Was Jesse killed too? And apparently, there is no data on that. No data on Jesse at all, because there weren't very good records kept about black people during this time. Al goes on to say that he thinks some of the very first protests took place very nearby. He brings up Autry Root. Sam ends up asking him how he knows so much about this stuff, and the question kind of annoyed me a little bit. Couldn't Al just happen to have interest in the subject of civil rights? Why does he need a reason to know these things? But Al says he has a lot of black friends, which Sam objects to, saying he can't believe Al said that. Okay. There is a distinction that I need to draw here. There's a little bit of a difference between saying, I have a black friend, therefore I can't be racist, which is what some people will use as a defense. This is not that. This is Al saying he has black friends, so he has familiarity with the history of the civil rights movement. But more than that, he mentions that he marched in Selma. And then Sam ends up cutting him off and not letting him finish that story, which is another way Sam kind of annoys me in this scene. Sam asks him, what if he's there to do that? And Al skeptically asks, what, get involved in the civil rights movement? He doesn't think so. And Sam asks, why not? And then they hear the sound of a distant train tooting its horn. And Al says, that's why you're here. We cut to Sam arriving home with Miss Melanie, where we encounter Clayton, Miss Melanie's son. He's the closest equivalent to the character, Dan Aykroyd's character, in Driving Miss Daisy. Only, in Driving Miss Daisy, Dan Aykroyd plays a kindly businessman who doesn't ever treat Morgan Freeman's character with anything less than respect. Whereas Clayton in this episode is nothing but an a-hole. He's early for supper because he wants to talk about Jesse, about the little incident that happened at the diner. He starts to get angry at Clayton's hateful words, even going as far as to almost hit the guy before restraining himself. Clayton goes to talk to Miss Melanie, his mother, and he says, we need to talk. And Miss Melanie says, whatever Jesse did at Miss Patty's has nothing to do with me. And Clayton is surprised, saying she must have ears like a bat. Clayton goes on to say that she is the widow of the former governor of the state. And when her little slave starts acting up, people will notice. Miss Melanie takes exception to this. She says she's fully aware of who she was married to, and she's fully aware of the responsibilities that comes with that. She doesn't need to be lectured by him. Clayton persists, and in response, Miss Melanie turns her back on him, goes back to sewing or whatever it is she's doing, and gives a little sniff, which indicates that she is upset by this conversation, and tells him not to forget the buttermilk. That little sniff and the back turn, and it's great acting. It might have something to do with Mike Beeger's direction, but it is also Susan French's acting as well. That's just pitch perfect in this scene. Clayton exits the scene, and Miss Melanie starts to experience physical problems as a result of her emotional distress. She calls for Jesse. Sam Beckett ends up coming into the room, and Miss Melanie says that it's just that Clayton gets so riled about things that have absolutely nothing to do with him. Sam tries to take care of her, goes pretty close to touching her, at which point Miss Melanie recoils and says to keep his colored voodoo to himself, which again, after humanizing this character and then having this moment, makes her a very interesting watch, because you never quite know how she's going to react. Is she going to react this way with the colored voodoo comment, or is she going to be more sympathetic? You never really do know. Nell arrives at Miss Melanie's door, Nell being the granddaughter of Jesse. And unlike many of the people in this episode, she's actually impressed with Jesse's actions, saying that it's time to rile up the white man to hopefully change their views. Nell is played by Kimberly Bailey, and she's still acting to this day, having appeared in American Horror Story, Gilmore Girls, and a few more television shows, such as Martin and Living Single. She has 35 acting credits, along with some background credits. Anyway, Miss Melanie says he can go. And they have a scene in the car with the two of them talking, Nell and Sam Beckett. And eventually he arrives home, where apparently he is supposed to make chiclets for the church. Only Sam doesn't know how to make chiclets. Al shows up, and apparently Al has not only had experience eating this, but also making it. The family disappears, and Sam has a conversation with Al about how to make what's going on here. And his son, played by Michael D. Roberts, re-enters the scene to see him talking to himself. He starts reading him the riot act about that, as well as what took place earlier in the episode, with him sitting at the lunch counter. Now, this is actually interesting. No matter how much people struggle, when there's a struggle for equal rights, or so on and so forth, there will always be people who want nothing to do with that struggle, who themselves are affected by it, that just want to keep their heads down and live their lives. Jesse probably was among those people. He probably was not a civil rights activist. He was just a person keeping his head down, staying out of trouble. Maybe at one point, his son was more of an activist. But now, he's older, he has a daughter, and he has more to lose. And I'm pretty sure he's also married. And then we have his daughter, Nell, who is young, idealistic, hasn't been beaten down by life yet, and is more on the side of Sam Beckett than she would be Jesse Tyler. She wants to shake things up, regardless of any potential consequences. Now, I actually recognized the actor straight off. I didn't know why until I looked at his Internet Movie Database. He also plays Isaiah King in this series, in a 5th season episode, The Leap Between the States, as a relative of Martin Luther King. And the irony of that is pretty damn funny. So he, too, has 2 appearances on this series as completely different characters. And he has 75 additional credits, including the Keanu Reeves movie, Street Kings. Al, of course, is overhearing this conversation and getting annoyed with Sam, saying that Sam promised him not to get involved like this. And Sam does not do a good enough job defending himself, because this was before he had a chance to talk to Al. This was before he even knew who he was or where he was. Sam continues to insist that he's there to get involved in the civil rights movement, and Al is telling him that he's out of his league. Sam goes on to say that he sat at that counter because he was hungry, and instead of seeing a hungry man, they saw a black man, and that was wrong. Okay, Sam, listen up. Al is not disagreeing with you about any of this. You're preaching to the choir. Al knows that this is wrong. That's not his argument. His argument is, 1, your mission is to save Miss Melanie. 2, taking on beginning the civil rights movement is more of a fight than Sam can realistically be called upon to take on when he's only going to be there for a short amount of time. And Jesse is an old man. I doubt he wants anything to do with starting a revolution. He's just too old for that. This conversation is interrupted by a scream, and as it turns out, there's a burning cross on the lawn. We cut to a scene of Sam discussing the incident with the sheriff, and the sheriff doesn't seem interested in helping him in the least bit. But Sam says he can identify the assailants. And of course, the sheriff still is not interested, mostly because it's his sons that are involved. He's using, oh, the boys will be boys argument, and no harm came to this. And any further escalation is up to Jesse himself. Frustrated and thirsty, Sam takes a drink from a water fountain, which happens to be a whites only water fountain, which does not go unnoticed by the sheriff's two boys. Now, when I was originally watching this episode, I was going to take issue with Sam Beckett's actions in this episode, thinking that Sam basically made this family's life worse by his well-intentioned actions. But here's the thing. Every action that Sam takes that escalates the situation, such as the lunch counter incident and drinking out of a whites-only water fountain, is completely by accident. Sam Beckett is not used to living as a second-class citizen as a black man in the Jim Crow South. So he doesn't have to think about the things that Jesse would have to. He doesn't have to worry about those things, and thus he's paying no attention, because normally he does not have to. Sam has talked a big game in this episode, talking about how everything is wrong and how he should get involved in the civil rights movement, but every act of rebellion that Sam takes is actually an accident. And once again, I will point out that we are way outside the original history. There is no way that any of these events took place in Jesse's original lifetime. The events have been changed by Sam Beckett just being here. We cut to Jesse with Miss Melanie trying to fix a leaky pipe, which does not go well, and they end up laughing together. This is followed by a scene where Sam attempts to have tea with Miss Melanie, and she objects. Sam is confused. She was kind enough to make the tea, so he thought he would join her and enjoy her company. But Miss Melanie says that blacks and whites do not eat at the same table. And he asks why. Who says that they can't? And Miss Melanie says that she says she can't. It's a great scene because Miss Melanie is not being actively hateful here. She's not really actively hateful throughout the episode, but she is a product of her system. This is the way things are, and they cannot be changed. At least that's her way. And when challenged on this by Sam, she seems confused and doesn't really know how to answer the question, other than saying, "This is just the way it is." Nell briefly interrupts the scene, presumably to take Jesse home, but Jesse is being taken home by himself, driving Miss Melanie's car. He comes back to join Miss Melanie, and the scene continues with the two of them discussing that things will change. Miss Melanie said that she thought when Jesse sat at that counter that he was simply old and had slipped his mind, but now she thinks he's just gone completely crazy. Sam, frustrated, says he's the one that's gone crazy. He's not the one who's setting off burning crosses in people's yards. And this comment seems to take Miss Melanie aback. We cut to Nell, who's driving in her car on the way back. And she's soon going to be run off the road by the sheriff's sons because they think it's Jesse. When they realize their error, they speed off. Cut back to Sam and Miss Melanie. Sam is getting nowhere with this conversation. She says that she has to go in town to get some personal items. And eventually, she's going to go by herself. But Sam realizes that might not be such a good idea because she's destined to get squashed by a choo-choo train. So he insists on going along for the ride. Along the way, they notice Nell's car. Actually, it's Miss Melanie who notices and calls Sam's attention to it. Sam runs out of the car to a not all that good looking Nell. I mean, the actress is pretty, but in her current state, she does not look good. She's bleeding, and Sam Beckett decides to move her after helping her a little bit to take her to the hospital. Now, I'm not a doctor or an EMT, But moving somebody who's been in a car accident, who's in this current state, is not a wise move. But I guess waiting around for an ambulance is a non-starter, as one is probably not going to come anytime soon. Sam rushes to the hospital, and he's rushing in the wrong direction, according to Miss Melanie, because the black hospital is in the other direction. Sam doesn't give a damn. He's going to take her to the white hospital. And Miss Melanie says that they won't take her, but Sam says, oh, yes, they will. They get to the hospital, and Sam leaps out of the car with Miss Nell in his arms, and he's talking all sorts of medical jargon, and the nurses and doctors are just staring at him. They are making no move to help him whatsoever. And they won't help her until Miss Melanie stands up and demands that they do so, which demonstrates growth in her character, and that Sam's words are at least being heard by her and starting to be acted upon, if not completely. They take her into the hospital, and Miss Melanie goes inside, but she insists that Sam stay outside. Soon after, he's joined by Al, who's suggesting that he leave with Miss Melanie right then and there. And Sam thinks he's just being paranoid. That Miss Melanie is in no way in danger of getting squished. But the sheriff appears to arrest him for breaking the law by bringing Nell to a whites-only hospital. Sam begins to struggle, and the sheriff is basically like, hey, don't make me get rough with you. And Sam says he'll go, as long as Miss Melanie is instructed to stay at the hospital and not leave. The sheriff agrees to the terms. Miss Melanie eventually comes outside to see that Jesse is not there, and he asks, where is he? To the nurse, who is the one who called the cops in the first place. And he tells her, that Jesse has been arrested. And Miss Melanie takes exception to this, and she's going to go to the police station to deal with this situation. But the nurse tells her that the sheriff instructed her not to leave. Miss Melanie doesn't care. She's going to leave anyway. And initially, Al was like, yeah, good for you. Wait, no, you can't leave, don't go. But she does anyway. Okay, this is the point where I bring up why I've been saying all episode long that the timeline has been mangled beyond any recognition. In the original timeline, there is no way Jesse sat at that counter, leading to the burning cross, leading to him going to see the sheriff and drinking out of a whites-only water fountain, leading to Nell being run off the road, leading to them being brought, or rather Nell being brought to a whites-only hospital. There is no way that any of these events took place in the original timeline. So there's no reason why Miss Melanie should still be on her way to being squished by a choo-choo train. Unless we're going with, no matter what you change, things still unfold as they will. But if that's the case, then Sam shouldn't be able to change anything, and Miss Melanie should just be dead. But that is not the premise of this series. So if I have one criticism of this episode, it's this. Basically, Miss Melanie should not still be on her way to getting killed, because everything that has happened in this episode is markedly different from the original timeline. As Miss Melanie drives, Al is right next to her, desperately trying to talk her out of continuing along that path. He's yelling and shouting, and Miss Melanie can't hear him. Until very near the end, when all of a sudden, Al manages to get through and tell Miss Melanie to pull off into the cemetery. Somehow, she manages to hear just in time to avoid her fate of being hit by a train. And Miss Melanie thinks the voice belonged to her late husband. We cut to Sam in jail as Al is enthusiastically talking about how he managed to get through to Miss Melanie. And Sam is curiously subdued here, probably thinking about the events of what took place during the course of this episode. And Al goes on to suggest, if I can reach Miss Melanie, maybe I can reach other women, younger women, hotter women. The sheriff enters the scene, and once again, is all like, boys will be boys. It turns out he knows that his boys are responsible for Nell. And he's all like, they didn't mean to hurt her none. And this line of thinking is outrageous and infuriating, as it's supposed to be. What do you mean they weren't trying to hurt her? And no, the fact that they thought it was Jesse in the car does not justify this. Sure, there are laws. Desegregation laws, or segregation laws rather. Desegregation is the opposite of that. But, alright, so you can't go to a whites-only hospital. That's a law, so Jesse had to go to jail. But you know what else is against the law? Attempted murder, which is what running somebody off the road is. So his whole argument that Jesse should be in jail while his son should be out walking around is completely and utterly ridiculous, and I'm sure very truthful to the time period we're talking about. The sheriff is not interested in justice. Not really. He's not interested in fairness, which the law rarely considers anyway. The law is not about fairness. The law is about the status quo and maintaining a society, regardless of how effed up that society might be, which is the case here. Sam is understandably upset, and he's going on and on, while Al is telling him, hey, calm down, it's gonna happen. Eventually, Martin Luther King is gonna start up the civil rights movement. Well, really, he's the most famous example, but the civil rights movement will start up otherwise. Still, eventually, things are going to change, and this is not how it's going to be. And I would argue that things still need to change today, as we can see with the Black Lives Matter protests and the not the cop killings, but everything that's going on in society today is evidence that we still have a long way to go in society to fix our various issues. Anyway, the sheriff is here to release him because Miss Melanie paid for his bail. He leaves the jail and says, I'll see you, Al. And I think he does this largely just to screw with the sheriff. And Al, for some reason, is staying behind and whistling and singing. Sam goes outside to see Miss Melanie. Miss Melanie informs him that Nell will be just fine. She was transferred to a blacks-only hospital. And Sam rightly points out that the move could have killed her. But Miss Melanie, completely missing the point, says, but it didn't, and she's with her own kind now. And Sam argues that she needs to change her views. But Miss Melanie already knows that this situation is messed up, that things are not right, that they are not fair, that they are not just. She sees that all perfectly fine. But it can't change. This is the way things are. Sam argues differently, but Miss Melanie doesn't want to hear it anymore. She tells him to go fetch her lunch. And eventually Sam gives up and does so. He enters the diner, preparing to get Miss Melanie's lunch, while being looked at by the two sons that should be in jail for attempted murder. Anyway, I'll get off that now. And the sheriff. Eventually, Miss Melanie comes inside and says, never mind, I've changed my mind. I'm going to have lunch here. She sits at the counter, and Jesse thinks, or rather Sam Beckett thinks, that he is being dismissed, and he starts to leave. But Miss Melanie tells him to hold on. Why not join her for lunch? The suggestion creates a stir amongst everyone, and Sam Beckett, smiling, goes to join her. This creates anger, and the two sons stand up, but the sheriff calls him off and tells him not to do anything. and so Sam sits down next to Miss Melanie. Miss Melanie having changed her mind. Not really changed her mind about the injustice, but about doing something about it. Sam Beckett has succeeded in changing one mind, and sometimes that's all you need to do. And with that, Sam Beckett leaps. And that is the episode. A fantastic episode of the series. This is the show really finding its stride. There's a few problems which I pointed out, but it doesn't change the quality of this episode. I'm debating whether to continue with my pattern of doing a This Is Us rewatch video after doing a Quantum Leap one, or if I'm just going to go ahead and do the Kamikaze Kid, which is the next episode in this series, and one that I'm really looking forward to talking about, because it's one of my favorite of this season. I might even try to do both. If I stick to my normal pattern, the next time we talk about Quantum Leap for the episode Kamikaze Kid will be 2 weeks from now, with This Is Us rewatch video appearing next week. But we'll see. I haven't made up my mind yet. If you like this video and want to support the channel, there are a number of ways to do so. You can follow me on Twitter at Korman Productions. You can join my Korman Productions Facebook group. You can buy something from the Korman Productions store on Zazzle. You can buy me a coffee, which is a new way to support content creators such as myself. And of course, you can like, share, and comment on this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. This is Dave from Korman Productions, signing off.